Let's welcome our panelists this morning. First up, Mr. Mayor of Broomfield, in the city and county of Broomfield, Randy Ahrens. March in 2013, re-elected in 2015, again in 2017. His current term ends in November of next year. Prior to being mayor, he was a city council member from 01 through 09. His parents moved to Broomfield in 1966. So he is a longtime resident of Broomfield, and after he graduated from college, he moved his family back in 1986. He is a business owner in Broomfield, and he states that his passion for the well-being of the Broomfield citizens will always guide his decisions about the future of that community. Again, welcome, Mayor Randy Ahrens. Heidi Gill is our next panelist. We welcome her up on the stage. Heidi is the founder and CEO of Urban Solutions Group. She's a litigation and public relations professional, expertise in social and operational impact assessments in this industry. She has extensive experience in residential litigation and strategic community outreach in multiple industries. In 2017, she founded Urban Solutions Group with the hopes and intention of merging the technical and social to produce some new mitigation approaches, which she's going to talk a lot more about. So please welcome Heidi. Murphy is also with us here today. We're very honored. She is the director of the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. She oversees a staff of a little over 100 people that regulate the oil and gas industry in Colorado. She's well versed in multifaceted issues, including conflicts facing natural resource management from the policy, technical, and legal perspectives. And prior to her appointment, she served as the assistant director for energy and minerals with the State Department of Natural Resources. Julie, thank you. Wright. He's the CEO of Liberty Resources and the CEO of Liberty Oilfield Services as well, an oilfield service company specializing in hydraulic fracturing with operations in North Dakota, Colorado, and Wyoming. Please welcome Chris up to the stage. And all of you come on up and we'll have you take a seat. Chris completed an undergrad degree in mechanical engineering at MIT and then performed graduate work in electrical engineering at both UC Berkeley and MIT. He founded Pinnacle Technologies. For 14 years, he served as the CEO of that company, chairman. Pinnacle created the hydraulic fracture mapping industry and developed the world's most widely used fracture modeling systems. Now, if that wasn't enough, and if he hasn't accomplished enough already, he has consulted and taught courses on every continent in this world and authored or co-authored 60 technical papers and articles, and just to throw in, he's got numerous patents as well in this industry. So please welcome Mr. Chris Wright. There are three main areas we're going to focus on this morning during your panel discussion, and then again we'll have Q&A from the audience. Innovation, we're going to take a look at the regulatory environment, and then finally the political environment that is also influencing the industry. But we're going to start with innovation. Chris, if you don't mind, we'll start with you. You are a Colorado native. You've really been on the forefront of innovations in this industry. And you can talk a little bit about some of those developments that have put your industry on the forefront and what you were responding to as a result of coming up with some of that technology.
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming this morning and your interest in energy. I was born, I say I'm a science geek turned tech nerd turned frac entrepreneur, but I did not intend to go into oil and gas. You know, when I was a kid, we were running out of oil and gas, and I went to college to work on fusion energy. In graduate school, I worked in solar energy. I worked in geothermal energy for years. So I don't have any background in oil and gas. It was not by design. I just wanted to work in energy. Very lucky, and only because of my wife, I'm actually in the oil and gas business. But when we came our operations to Colorado, Colorado's a unique state in that fantastic resources, but these resources are right against population centers, and in fact the population centers are growing into the oil field. I also celebrate that because Colorado's a fantastic state, and people want to live in the great place that we live, and I want to welcome them all here. But it leads to this interaction. So we looked at in the what are the complaints, what are the big issues on that interface between oil and gas operations and population centers. And the biggest area of complaints had been noise, truck traffic, and dust. So we thought, Look, humans are innovative, Americans are innovative, and we ought to find solutions and answers for those. So we launched 4 years ago a 2-year-long effort. I thought it would be 6 months, so optimism always reigns supreme. But it took us 2 years to develop a fracturing fleet that was quiet. A hydraulic fracturing fleet on location, there's 45,000 horsepower, right? Because we're pumping water 2 miles underground and moving the rock of the earth apart so water can flow through it. So that takes high pressure and high injection rate. So that's roughly the power of a 747 jet engine. And it took us 2 years to make it so that 747 jet engine at 500 feet away, the minimum setback distance, was ambient noise level and couldn't be heard or interfere with the neighbors. Huge effort. I don't deserve much credit for it, but our team did a fabulous job. We also, and I won't talk too long to it, for dust, a way people moved sand just historically. It's like a big dump truck and you blow sand off. It's like a vacuum cleaner in reverse to get the sand out of the truck that's coming from the train terminal into the bins on location. And it caused also noise and a lot of dust. It didn't seem like it made a lot of sense. So we also brought a very simple technology, which is just keeping sand in sealed steel containers and then have it drain just from gravity out the bottom onto a conveyor system that's covered. So if you go out into a frac location, several million pounds of sand will be pumped underground each day, and you'll have to look hard to see any sand. So, and by delivering sand that way, and also, I won't go into it, allowed us to reduce truck traffic and lines of truck waiting. Our customers, E&Ps, have done a phenomenal job in figuring out how to use pipelines and remote gathering systems to drive truck traffic down. The interface between drilling an oil and gas well or building a Starbucks or building a road will never be zero, but I think technology and the passionate humans in our industry have driven that impact down dramatically. And we will continue so. There's several more efforts, but I'll talk too long if I go into them.
That's right, we'll get to those a little bit later, but real quickly, give us a sense of the direct impact or the return on the decrease in noise. Typically, on average, how much has it been reduced as a result of this?
So the technical math nerd question is, it's been 18 decibels, and to your ear and sound perception, it's 8 times quieter than it was with a traditional frac fleet without the sound suppression.
Awesome, thank you. Heidi, let's turn to you now. You've seen an opportunity in the industry to address some of the resident concerns as well. Talk about your business, what you all are doing, and the impact it's also having on the industry and, more importantly, the communities.
So when I went to found Urban, I'm very passionate about resourcing oil and natural gas in the United States and also Colorado specifically, but wasn't ignorant to the fact that you have the social challenges with the homes on top of an active oil field, or people that are moving closer to what has been an active oil field. So at Urban, we're a bit unique in the fact that we believe in social and technical, and those are both equally important. You have to utilize the quiet fleets of the world or different tools and technologies that help reduce impacts, but you also have to account for the social side of things in terms of collaboration, proactive engagement, and taking that feedback and truly incorporating it into an operation. And every location is different. You don't have to have a quiet fleet at every location, but you might have to have something else. But one thing that we believe in is you always have to engage directly impacted stakeholders, because this is their homes and people are very passionate about their homes. So Urban's approach is working with operators to help in a collaborative nature with communities, and then we also help provide products that help mitigate operations. So Urban's primary product is we filed a patent on a new type of sound wall that goes around location, and we're very proud of that and the fact that it's up and it's working very well, and the feedback has been very positive. Our wall is able to be installed and taken down substantially faster, which helps because it reduces the overall impact time to the community, and every day matters, right? When you're near people's homes and these operations are going on, even if you have a restaurant being built next to you or a grocery store, every day that you can shorten that, it matters. And so that's one thing that we're really proud of. It also has increased structural integrity, It's easier for operators to move around locations, so it's safer for our employees when they're installing and taking it down. And then aesthetically, we know that this stuff matters. It's in people's communities, so we try to do what we can to also make it look more visually appealing as well.
And talk a little bit, if you can, about what motivated you to lean into this kind of technology.
So I think whether, to Chris's point, the issues with operations are noise, light, dust, odor, aesthetics. And the nature of the operation in terms of drilling and hydraulic fracturing is that these are temporary locations. So it doesn't make sense to come in and build permanent stone walls or things of that nature. And you always are going to have some form of perimeter barrier. We have our walls on several locations where there are quiet fleets because we also need to mitigate odor, light, dust, and aesthetics. And so for us, our first product, we knew that we thought we could do better with the walls. And we thought that is what, when you put those up, you tackle more of kind of the nuisances in terms of noise, light, dust, odor, aesthetics. So that was kind of our first product, but we definitely don't plan on stopping there, so.
We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Julie, let's switch to you. So COGCC is one of those acronyms that if you happen to attend a hearing or anywhere in this region, you're going to hear that thrown out. If you could just briefly talk about what you do in this agency and what your primary focus is, and then I'll follow up with another question.
Me as in me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think my mic's on, so if you can't.
Yeah, here.
Great.
I'll take 6 mics. That might help. Anyway, I'm the director of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. I've been appointed since the beginning of March, and in that role, I oversee a staff of about 110 people. We'll be up to 115 with the recent legislative authorization on an orphan well program. And my day-to-day job is engaging and overseeing an agency that we have a budget of about $20 million and implementing Colorado's regulatory regime statewide for oil and gas. So a lot of our focus right now is in this North Metro area, or the GWAT, as you may hear me refer to it, which is the Greater Wattenberg area, or the DJ Basin. But there are also active fields and active oil and gas development throughout the state. The oldest development is in Boulder, the oldest continuously active rig is in Florence County. So we really do have a robust history here in Colorado with oil and gas and mining.
Let's talk a little bit about what you have seen, since we're talking about innovation, changes and shifts in technology, how it's impacting and changed perhaps communities over the years, and more importantly, is it driving policy or is the reverse happening?
I think to use an overly used phrase, it's a chicken and egg scenario, certainly. The innovations in downhole technology when it comes to horizontal development and fracking, and Colorado's first horizontal well in the 2012-2014 timeframe, that has really driven a whole regulatory regime, and Colorado's been at the forefront of that regulatory regime overhaul. I think Colorado has approached this question and this issue in a very thoughtful way, in that we look for performance-based regulations. And for those of you that doesn't mean anything, it means that we try to set standards and expectations. So you will achieve a certain degree of noise mitigation, or you will not create this type of impact. But Colorado's not in the business of establishing prescriptive regulations that say you shall use this specific technology. And that to me is the right place to be in as a regulator, because it allows people like Chris to innovate to those standards and to go above and beyond. And we at the state are not in the constant battle of trying to catch our regulations up to technology. There are also examples in Governor Hickenlooper convening a number of oil and gas operators in the environmental community on methane regulations, which is outside my sphere, so please don't ask me too many follow-up questions. But that is a place where Colorado really led with the environmental community to establish regulations that were achievable and made a meaningful difference to Colorado's air quality. Those regulations are now being looked at a nationwide basis. Some of our federal agencies implemented a version or an iteration of them. So I think it's been a mixed bag on that front, and I'm very proud of what Colorado has done in this arena.
Awesome. Only you could pull that off, and your time too. Let's talk about, from a community standpoint, as a leader of the city and county of Broomfield, what more would you like to see happening in the world of technology and innovation in this industry, and how can communities like yours perhaps take more advantage of that?
Well, I guess we could go extract all the oil and gas by osmosis. That would be the optimal solution. But I want to say the socks and the tie, I want to remind everybody, that back in 2001, we had 9/11. And I was actually at the memorial last month, and I bought these socks at the memorial shop. And so to me, if you could just take just a second to remember those that lost their lives in 9/11. Thank you. So you talk about the innovation. Broomfield's been involved with oil and gas since 50s. A lot of you may not know that I actually worked in oil and gas in the 70s and 80s, and I first saw wells being fracked when I was in Oklahoma and Texas and some tight line formations that it was being utilized. So fracking's been around a long time, 40 years. However, that was always done on vertical wells because the company I worked with at the time, a company called Gerhard Owens, was actually helping develop what they call their MWD, measurement while drilling tools. And one of the first wells we did utilizing that technology actually went under the state capitol in Oklahoma. But that company eventually got bought by a little small company called Halliburton. So, what's happened is you've got a paradigm shift. We're up in North Dakota, someone discovered, well, oil and gas tends to rise, and they started going into some of these formations above some of the typical lime and sandstones and did the horizontal. And if you think about it, if you go down vertically into a well and you perforate the wells and then you do your acetizing and fracking, you're gonna, maybe get a couple 100 feet zone of interest over there. But when the technology shifts and you can go up to 2 and 2.5 miles, the old vertical wells, if they were lucky, the operators would recover about 3 or 4% of the oil and gas reserves. And now with the with the horizontal technology encompassed with the fracking, they can achieve rates, they're talking around 14%. So that's one of the reasons that you're seeing the big boom. I appreciate the companies like Liberty that are doing what they can and come up with novel ways to mitigate what they can to solve a lot of the issues with the sound. I think it's interesting when you talk about one of the biggest concerns our council had, and we've been working, our council's worked so hard, and Liz and Ken and Dave that I see here. We've spent the last 2 years working on a memorandum of understanding to get the absolute best that we can do. Our memorandum of understanding exceeds what the state guidelines are. And that's not because Julie and her group doesn't want to do it, it's because they're limited by the state legislature. So what we've done as an elected body is we've gone over there, I could give you a copy of our ordinance 2067. And it's pretty complete. The last time we actually did an update on our oil and gas back in 2002. And that was because we came in, we had a development, McKay Landing, coming in, and I just got elected in 2001. We had all these homes being platted, but I happened to know that there was a lot of oil and gas wells, so I got a map from Adams County and I looked and see where the plug and abandoned wells were. And I noticed they had about 5 houses that were immediately atop a plug and abandoned wells. To me, that wasn't a good idea to put a house directly on top of plug and abandoned wells. So we changed our ordinance 2067. At the same time, we also, someone else on staff had a pretty good idea that we ought to remove all the gas and flow lines in all developments. And if you think about what happened in Firestone would not have happened in Broomfield because we were 16 years ahead of our time. So I think as legislative bodies, we all need to work together, need to work with the state, work with companies to always be looking for what is the next best, safest alternatives, and we'll keep doing that.
Thank you, Mayor. And we'll talk more about the regulatory challenges and what you leaned into in Broomfield in a minute. But Chris, let's talk about regulatory issues here in just a moment. Let's take a quick break. If you've got a question on the innovation or technology side, now would be a time to write that down at your tables and raise those cards so we can collect them. We'll get some questions to the panel afterwards. But on the regulatory side, Chris, we are the seventh largest producer now of oil, 5th largest producer of natural gas. How does the Metro North area fit into this kind of production? And based on what you're seeing regulatory-wise in this region, how are we reacting to that?
Well, yes, you say we're the 5th largest producer of natural gas and 7th largest producer of oil. but the Colorado oil production is rising fast. US oil production is rising fast, and Colorado, together with Texas, are the two big drivers of that rate of increase. This means lower energy prices, more jobs, lower oil imports, blah, blah, blah. But in any case, the growth in Colorado's oil production is all right here. Literally, we're on top of it. And it's a little bit to the north and the east of us, some of it's to the west of us and the south of us. So we are right here on top of, by far and away, the dominant source of Colorado's oil production. I can ask sometime, why don't you guys just produce it way out there, you know, away from everyone? And it's a reasonable question. And the answer is it was laid down 100 million years ago, and that's where it is. It's also, that's where the infrastructure is, the pipelines are, and the legacy work makes it easier to develop new wells when there's already legacy infrastructure in place. But yes, so the explosion of energy production in Colorado is happening right here, right in your community. And so I think the communities, and I think the poster child right now is Broomfield. This process to develop oil and gas in Broomfield that'll lower the current emissions in Broomfield dramatically from where they are, get rid of 41 legacy wells that have been there for decades, and replace them with modern wells, which are obviously much better and much safer, and move the oil storage outside of the city through underground pipelines. It took years to do it. Look, if I was in the oil and gas business, I would have the exact same questions. What the hell's going on over there? What's going on under my house? I think community concerns are very real, very valid, and they need to be addressed in dialogue. But really the tip of the spear in interactions between communities and oil and gas development for our country is right here in Colorado. All the other big oil producing areas right now are not near big population centers. Natural gas production in this country is near population centers back in the Northeast. And, but there's precedent for it. I mean, the city of LA is a giant oil field. One of the first frac projects I did was in Beverly Hills. Right, the Beverly Hills Mall is a crescent, and it was the center of the crescent. That's 20 years ago. So it's happened before, but really the biggest interaction right now is right here in Colorado. So fantastic for Colorado's economy and all that, but it comes with trade-offs. Nothing comes for free. But that interaction between how communities and regulators deal with oil and gas operations, the cutting edge and the biggest effort for that all is not only in Colorado, but it's right here in your community.
And Julie, let's talk more about the regulatory framework that you have under COGCC, and you know, and what sort of.
I think I'd love to follow Mayor Ahrens' comments, because I do think that Broomfield has set a different example, and one that we at the state are trying to support wholeheartedly. I think that it's an example of operators working with their local community in a way that we haven't seen before, and I realize there have been some challenges and not everybody's thrilled about how it's gone down, but I think to me it's evidence of the change in the evolution in the thinking and how we can work together instead of prescribe how it will be. And I hope that dialogue continues, and that's the hardest thing to regulate. I mean, I can talk for days about our 2A process, which is our surface use permitting process, but I'm not sure that really gets to the heart of the question that we're facing in Colorado. Is it, how can we do this together? How can we engage? How can we listen to one another? And so those would be my really superficial comments. If you want more.
Well, let's dive a little deeper into how you specifically engage with residents in communities.
Sure, and it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are different opportunities to participate in COGCC's permitting processes. Processes for permits to drill, processes for surface use development. We can take comments carried directly from the community on those in particular, and our staff is available to answer questions about what these different permits mean, and how to work through them and where they're going to be, et cetera, et cetera. I think our agency is also evolving in its interest in being available and transparent. There hasn't been a huge call from the public over the course of the agency's life to answer questions and to respond directly to community issues, and we're evolving in that front. We're trying to be more responsive, more available, and I think that's an important transition in a place like Colorado where we have such a profoundly engaged public And I think we're going to continue to improve in that front. Our website has been overhauled recently to help facilitate it. I think it could use an overhaul 2.0 to make it a little bit more user-friendly to folks who aren't as familiar with the industry as I am. And so the other place where we really look for engagement is with the local government. And to that end, Colorado has an innovative local government designee process that empowers somebody within the local government to provide very direct feedback and very direct communication to our agency about proposed oil and gas activity in the neighborhood. And it's through that LGD that we hope to communicate best with the local government and with local communities and receive feedback on our processes.
One more quick question.
Yeah.
Hopefully this is a quick one. This is a very energetic topic, and we don't have to explain that to our elected officials. What are some of the key drivers, do you think, coming from the concerns that you're hearing from communities and residents right now? What's driving this energy and concern?
I think we all care passionately, as Heidi noted, about what's happening in our neighborhood and how it's happening. And, you know, we talk about energy often, but sometimes when people use the word energy, they only mean oil and gas, or they only mean renewables, or they only mean whatever form of electricity they particularly want to consume. And so we are in this transformative era of electricity generation from different fuel sources, and how is Colorado going to participate in driving that change or not? And I think that's really taken hold in the same space as talking about whether and how we should develop oil and gas in Colorado. And trying to piece those different conversations apart is one of the challenges that I have faced to get down to the real issues of what our agency can address in those conversations and what ones are best left to a different decision-making body like the legislature.
Heidi, you have obviously been involved in the industry for quite some time, and the industry as a whole it is concerned, or at least they've expressed that to us and others, that there are some misconceptions that they feel are out there in the communities about the industry overall. Tell us a little bit about your feelings about some of the misconceptions facing the energy industry this time.
I think the first and most primary thing that's concerning to myself is the amount of misinformation that is out there. It's terrifying. If you go on the internet and mix that with social media, you go on the internet and you take the average attention span of a person, we read headlines. And unfortunately, I think a whole other topic is responsible journalism, but I think that a lot of misinformation is constantly circulated. And so the first thing I would say that people need to do is truly educate yourself. And when I mean that, I mean don't go on Google. It's like WebMD, not your friend. Don't ever go on WebMD if you think you're sick. You're gonna read stuff and then it's gonna be awful. So really educate yourself and encourage people to go to sources and then also verify, are those a biased source or are they not? But misinformation, I think, is huge. And I always say perception's 9/10 of the law, and whether that is with an operation. I know Liberty has some interesting stories about perception in terms of how quiet they are, and people came up at one point once they started and said, when are you gonna start? And they're like, we've been going for several days. And then after that, then there were complaints and you know, again, they were already operating for a few days. But I think that misinformation and perception are huge. And you know, I think the other thing is that people don't realize how serious oil and gas is taking this community challenge. I mean, companies like Liberty and Urban, we're here just in response to the concern from people. And operators are making decisions up front, large decisions about what types of equipment they're going to use and how they're going to go through a permitting process and how they're going to work with the local government. And it's based on feedback and this challenge. And then the last thing, I truly think that you get a lot of transplants, and Colorado's a great place to live, which Chris was talking about. And there needs to be more disclosure on the realtor side of the fact that people are moving on top of an active oil field. To Chris's point, we can't pick it up and move it. And a lot of times I feel like people believe that this is happening to them, which I understand, it's your home and you're surrounded by it, but I think we also need to be transparent that we're coming back and operating in an active oil field.
Anyone else want to respond before I put one of you on the spot? Chris? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I've had the opportunity to talk to you a little bit on one of the tours, one of your sites, and to me, one of the questions I asked when we were on this tour is, where can you find information? Where can you find information that you can trust? So that's number one, if you can offer a little insight to that. And then more importantly, I guess I would ask you to speak for the industry itself. What can the industry do better in getting the education opportunity out there?
A lot. Look, historically, we've been terrible. I think truly terrible at public communication and outreach. When I was a kid and I grew up, then there was a mania. We were running out of oil and gas and mass starvation was coming soon. But we also knew the oil and gas industry was awful. It was dirty, it was terrible, it was old. And I believed it because that's all I ever heard. And I think in our industry, already known as the bad guys when I was a kid, think how long ago that was. And then, so given that mentality, I think what was our industry's modus operandi, right? It was deal with the elected officials you need to, deal with the towns like right next door because you've got to, deal with them, do the right thing, but in general, don't speak to the public or speak to the public with these carefully scripted talking points that no one would believe and no one should believe. You know, to me, the only way you ever get trust or interaction is open, candid dialogue. We're humans. Do we make mistakes? Of course we do. You know, there are downsides to what we do. Of course there are. You know, but if you speak openly and honestly, I think it changes the game. But we've just been in this gear where we've been there forever. Everyone takes it for granted, and we just keep our heads down. And we've been defined by two things: by our opponents. They speak about us way more than we speak about ourselves. That's nuts. You never win a debate if you don't participate. And the other way we've spoken is the worst parties, right? And in the industry, there are lots of companies. Are there some people that do something bad? Of course. The Macondo explosion, to use more recent time, the blowout in the Gulf of Mexico. Truly crazy that 4 just monstrously important decisions were made wrongly. Right? But that's how you hear about us when something goes really wrong. Which is why, I will say, to follow up on Julie's point, the industry as a whole has in general, and this is never perceived by the public, has generally been stridently for strong and clear regulations. I'm an operator, a producer of oil and gas in North Dakota. We lobbied and engaged with the North Dakota government to change the regulations. The most dangerous thing in an oil and gas well is when you drill it, you put a piece of steel pipe in the ground, and then you've got to put cement between the pipe and the dirt where you drilled the hole through. You've got to cement that pipe. That is the pathway that oil and gas can get from underground up to the surface. It's not via the hydraulic fractures or anything else. It's via that way. The first 44 years of drilling oil and gas wells, there was no cement. There wasn't oilfield cement. That's in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Ohio. For 44 years, they drilled wells with no cement isolation. Today, obviously, we've had cement isolation for over 100 years now. We have now great technologies to measure it and confirm it's true. And in North Dakota, it used to be optional to run a high-tech log and confirm it's sealed. We and all of our colleagues in the industry pushed, that's got to be required. Because you don't want the one bad actor, corner cutter, to define what your industry is about. So Colorado's sort of rigorous, performance-based regulation, celebrated by the industry, not critiqued by the industry. You hear about us when we're complaining when there's ideas that we don't think are productive to make operations more safely. But if they're productive for increasing safety or whatever, the industry is all for them, so you never hear that. You never hear that.
And just a quick follow-up, where can I, as a citizen or a member of the community, find some really good information about what's going on?
So I would say the best place to do that is independent. Like you can Google my name and see a bunch of talks, but I'm in the industry, right? So there's a bunch of universities. Colorado State University, CSU, has a groundwater monitoring network across huge swaths of Weld County. They're directly measuring what is groundwater where there's no oil and gas drilling, what's groundwater when there was no oil and gas drilling, and then there was oil and gas drilling. They're monitoring direct measurement of data. They got no dog in the hunt. They're measuring data. So there's been lots of university studies. The Scottish Royal Society, amazingly, did a comprehensive report on safety of shale drilling and what it means, as have a number of other independent groups. So there's lots of independent sources. I'd start there to get information. Obviously, there's activists, and with public health data, you can cherry pick 7 data points and draw any conclusion you want. But look at the Colorado Department of Public Health. Look at agencies that don't have a vested interest on one side or the other that have engaged and studied the issues. And there's huge amount of that data out there, huge amount.
Good. Anyone else want to throw anything in before we move to politics? Mayor, we'll begin with you.
I was going to answer some of the last questions after that.
Now, let's just switch gears to politics for a moment. A little bit about the environment specifically in Broomfield and how it has become part of the conversation a lot, and what you're dealing with as an elected official, and what's motivating the drive of these politics right now.
Well, I think it's interesting. I just want to go back just for a second. How many people remember waiting in the long lines in the 70s because we were out of gas? Yeah, I remember those too. And then I went to college and I became an agricultural chemical engineer and went into the oil field. And when I went into the oil field was at a time where people were wanting oil and gas companies to drill, because they were tired of being led around by OPEC, and if they decide they were going to raise the oil price, everybody's, gas prices would go up. And so back when I was in the oil and gas industry, people were asking us to drill. Marty, you remember that. You were back at Schlumberger. People wanted the oil and gas production. So it's kind of amazing to see how that shift, once people, we get saturated with oil and gas, and now, a lot of environmental things come into mind. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you go back and you look at my day, a lot of the oil and gas companies really didn't do a very good job of cleaning up their sites. They kind of went to their sites and they left them a disaster. But you had people, environmentalists, that, got involved and got the government. And now when people leave a site like in Alaska or Colorado, those sites are clean. You may not even be able to tell that oil and gas operations even occurred there. And in fact, one of the things that one of the operators has done in our area with extractions, they've contracted with the Butterfly Pavilion on an urban prairies project, that when they're done, they're going to come back and they're going to restore that vegetation to make that landscape look like it does today, 30 years from now when those wells are done. But you ask about the environment, oil and gas, when did that start? Well, we've had oil and gas in Broomfield since the 50s. We've had a lot of wells that were drilled, and we had some that were located in neighborhoods, the broadlands and that type of thing. No one ever really talked about. In fact, there's a well I could hit a 3-wood and a pitching wedge to from my house. And, no one really was too concerned about it. And nowadays, it's become a major concern. What's the difference? It's gone from vertical wells to large industrial sites. And I think that's what's been a concern. So if someone is out looking at buying a house in Broomfield or Thornton or wherever, you go through the process, and some people actually look at, the city's plans, the master plans. And if you buy a house and you think you're going to be in a suburban neighborhood, next thing you know, you buy a house and you want to be far away from like retail or gas stations. But now what's happened is people have got a nice serene environment, and next thing you know, about 2,500 foot away is a major industrial operation. And that's where it impacts our citizens. So they've gone thinking they bought a nice retirement home, they're not going to have to deal with it, and now they're going to get to. And so it's a reality that us as elected officials need to deal with it. And we need to come up with the safest plan we can. And we've worked pretty hard at it. Since 2013, we convened a task force that spent 2 years. We, stalled an operator extraction for 2 years. And in fact, they were involved in the oil and gas planning, which is the way to do it. I wish more operators would do it like extraction. And I give them a lot of credit for having the patience. And I got to tell you, that hasn't been clear sailing all the time. There was challenges here and there. We just had recent challenges. But as we move forward, we're doing everything we can to be safe. We're doing a risk analysis. And one of the last pieces of the puzzle that we put into a CDP was that if there are other methods that come out that are more safer than what we have now, we will have a reasonable discussion to see if it makes sense to move forward with the new technologies. You know, because quite frankly, when you look at technology and you think, what has happened in the last 30 years in oil and gas, the technology is amazing, as with anything. And so what's the technology going to be in 5 years? What types of chemicals are they going to be able to put into the wellbores to extract the hydrocarbons in 5 years, 10 years down the road? You know, quite frankly, we don't know, because I mentioned earlier that the oil and gas companies are getting around 13 or 14% of the reserves based on the horizontal drilling. Think about it, 13 or 14%. What if they could get to 50 with some new technology? I'm not sure if I answered the question, but in our community, we're actually pretty lucky. And I will tell you, we've got some citizens that are really engaged. I see them, some of them here. And I'm glad that they've been part of our journey, because we've got, and Julie, you know this, we've got a lot of citizens that go to your website daily. They can probably get around it better than you and I can. But they have done us a great service in that they've made our memorandum of understanding better. They've brought to light things that maybe we hadn't thought of. In fact, in the COGCC doing an insurance plan or something like that in November, December timeframe? Something like that, yeah. I don't remember the exact date either. Broomfield will have a seat at the table, yes. And, you know, so I just think as the community talks, I appreciate all those on both sides of the aisle in our community for getting to a place that I think ultimately we've got the best plan possible for today.
And Julie, from a regulatory standpoint, there has been some concern in some communities at certain times that perhaps a lot of the energy is coming from organized political groups, not necessarily citizens. But when I hear the mayor talk, it sounds like there has been a good mixture of that, and that there has been good dialogue with engaging and moving forward with that kind of discussion. Do you see that there is too much politics on one side or the other, or and how do you see that continuing as we move forward?
In my experience with the commission, it really is the citizens who are engaging in our process and are driving change and driving conversations in a meaningful way. I know a number of those citizens have expressed to me concern about why they have to. And, you know, my response is that this is how change is made, and this is how our process is contemplating engagement, is we do need to hear those voices from people as we're continuing to evolve and transition. And I mean, a couple of points that I'm just going to go into because you gave me the mic.
Please.
Are thinking about these evolutions in technology. And in the 2013 timeframe, most of the state was really worried about drilling in the Piceance Basin, which is out west, I think 2013. And it drove conversations about consolidating oil and gas development into single locations to avoid disturbing as much surface area. And so the regulations pushed really hard in that direction, the state level regulations, to consolidating. And so we've done so well at that on the Front Range now. Folks are saying, whoa, 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 these are too big. And so to me, that's this kind of constant evolution that we're struggling with and working through. But if we don't have the voices of those citizens, we lose out on hearing from them and learning from them and that participation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd just like to follow up. I mean, that's an excellent point. In Broomfield, for example, you know, you got wells going like this, and you got wells going like that. That's not a real good idea to have an intersection of those wells. So one of the benefits that we get is we're going to be plugging and abandoning like 40 well sites, you know, in the Broomfield area. If you think we've got 6 drilling sites that we're going to, you know, that really helped change the game because you go from 40 to 6 sites. That makes a big difference, and so a lot of people benefit, you know, at the same time. So I totally agree with what you're saying.
Good. Chris, let's have you weigh in on something here. The industry, here's the radio and reads publications, is spending a lot of money in Colorado's elections. What do you think needs to be done a little bit to perhaps educate people regarding setbacks, regarding the impact? And again, it goes back to the question of finding a trusted source to really understand what might happen.
Yes, so the setback issue, you know, look, if we pull, there's a ballot initiative. It was 97 when they were collecting signatures. It's 112 now. If I'm struggling to remember those, think about everybody else. That's to move the setback. So when you get a permit to drill an oil and gas well, how far away you need to be from a house or an occupied structure. 5 years ago, it was 150 feet in rural areas, and it was 350 feet in more densely populated areas. So we had a rulemaking and a joint effort between the regulatory body, the Congress, and the industry and population, and we moved that for rural areas more than tripled to 500 feet, 50% increase for urban areas to 500 feet, and then 1,000 feet away for schools or hospitals or high occupancy structures. That was done just in 2014. And I think it was a reasonable thing to do. It does have trade-offs. It's not slam dunk, it was a good thing. It has some negative things for the environment too, right? If you can't build something right by a road, then there's more dirt roads into, I think on balance it was probably a positive thing, but there's things on both sides. And then there's a small part of Colorado population. They are small, that really doesn't like oil and gas. I think a lot of them don't like capitalism or the modern world either. And so they have set out to you can't get Coloradans won't vote to ban oil and gas, but having setbacks further back sounds reasonable. So they got money, and in Colorado it's very easy to get something on the ballot. That's actually a little bit scary. A few $100,000, we could put something on the ballot, that everyone in South Denver gets to own the houses of everyone in North Denver. That has some other problems, but it's not hard to get something on the ballot. So this ballot initiative right now, when we do polling on it, our first poll, 62% of people say, that sounds reasonable. Let's just move them a little bit further away. It does sound reasonable. If you further show the map that's created, if you can't drill within 2,500 feet, not only of any occupied structure, but land or forest or dry creek bed, you end up excluding the vast majority of the state of Colorado from drilling. It's really sort of a backdoor way to shut down the industry in Colorado. But you would never know that from the wording of it. If you tell people, hey, this shuts down the industry in Colorado, there's at least 70-30 no against it. But if that election was tomorrow, it would pass and our industry would end in the state of Colorado. So are we involved in politics? Well, we have to be. It's very unfortunate, the politicization of oil and gas. It's become almost a partisan political issue. I personally believe this will pass. It is nonsensical. Even the protesters of our industry vote yes on oil and gas every hour of every day. The clothes they wear, the phone, the car, the roads, the lights, the cooking. We wouldn't live like we did. None of us would without oil and gas. So it becomes more of a NIMBY problem. Boulder County consumes more oil and gas per capita than the neighboring counties. It isn't that they don't like oil and gas. I think that's a misunderstanding. It's they, for whatever reasons, prefer it's produced, in the next door county, not in their county. But yes, how we got ourselves in this position, I think partially we need to reach out more. I think some good could come of this election year. I've got people from all industries calling us up. Oh my gosh, our business is at threat. 27% of the office space in downtown Denver is oil and gas companies. If you add in the accounting firms and legal firms that support, nearly 40% of all the office space in downtown Denver is oil and gas. Think of the guys running the sandwich shops and the hotels and all that. But they didn't know that before, they didn't think about that before. I wish they didn't have to think about that before. But yes, we have to and will spend lots of money to educate people that 2,500 foot setbacks has nothing to do with health and safety. It's an attempt to shut down a major industry in Colorado.
Heidi, I can see you nod your head. We'll get your feedback on that.
Okay, right now. Yes, to Chris's point, yes to all of it. What I encourage people to do is talk to people about it. And, a lot of people in this room, we're all here for a reason, right? We all want to come and have these discussions. There's people outside of the oil and gas industry that have no idea the benefits that their lives have, other than just consuming petroleum products and also heating their homes. but in terms of Chris's point, that are supported by people that work in oil and gas and money they spend in our economy. It's huge. I think about that if 112 was to pass, so Urban, we're a smaller company, we support 50 jobs right now in Colorado, either full-time or part-time, but majority full-time. That's 50 families. If this passes, we're done. I spent all last week in Pennsylvania looking at if we had to move our business, what would that look like? Where can we still survive as a company? And if you start to think about that, I close my eyes at night, I think about all these families that work for me right now, that truly love the industry, and we're here to help. We're here to bridge the gap between operators and communities. We're here to provide those innovations and those products. And it's truly devastating. You think about, I think in 2015, 2016, oil and gas gave $859 million to schools. So if that goes away, schools are already overcrowded. I think we can all agree teachers are underpaid and saints. And where are we gonna come up with that money? That's just one area that oil and gas contributes. And when you start kind of peeling the onion and you see how much of it, how ingrained it is, and how lucky we are to have it in Colorado, it's terrifying to think about it going away.
Thank you both for diving into that issue. And again, this is one of those issues where you really have to independently on your own research and do your homework. There are a lot of numbers being thrown out there. There's lots of information. We're going to see a lot more of it as we get closer to the election. But thanks for sharing that perspective. Either one, any of the panelists, if you wouldn't mind diving into this question from our audience, could you speak to how Colorado is helping solve the U.S. energy independence challenge? Oil and gas integrated and very integral to national security.
Well, yes, I mean, a few quick numbers. I'm a nerdy guy. I always use too many numbers. But just 11 years ago, the United States imported 60% of the oil we consumed. Well over half, 60%. This year, we'll import about 15% of the oil we consume. And we are also about to become the third largest natural gas exporter on the planet. Just a few years ago, we were #1 natural gas importer on the planet. So yeah, the changes for what it means for, and they say national security because of course we import oil mostly from a lot of countries that are not so friendly to us. But I'm going to leave that issue, and it's an issue, I'm going to leave that issue for a side. To me, the biggest issue on oil and gas and what's happening in Colorado and the country, to me it's about the poor. It's about blue collar people and poor people. I was crazy lucky, like I'm sure most of the people in this room. I was born in South Denver. I went to good schools. I got above average quantitative skills. I got a dreamy life. Not everyone gets that. Not everyone gets that. If you look about it, there's 1 billion people in the world today that do not have access to electricity. No access to electricity. There's close to another 1 billion that have electricity a few hours a day. Their lives are nothing like our lives. Nothing. Our ancestors, 200 years ago, before the first oil and gas well was drilled, life expectancy was less than half of what it was today, and over 90% of the human population lived in extreme poverty, meaning in today's dollars, less than $2 a day. People were smaller because the vast majority of people didn't get enough food to eat. That's just the last 200 years. The growth in human freedom, free enterprise, what I call liberty, and oil and gas created the modern world. But it hasn't arrived for everyone. So to me, by far and away, the biggest energy issue is this vast amount of people that don't have access to modern energy. They live like our ancestors lived, burning trees. You've seen the pictures of North Korea, of the Korean Peninsula at night, right? You can see the border between North and South Korea. Everyone's seen that. I show another picture. The island of Hispaniola during the day. Hispaniola is where Columbus first landed. The western half of the island of Hispaniola is Haiti. The eastern half of the island of Hispaniola is Dominican Republic. You can see the border during the day. And you can see it because Haiti, for whatever reasons, has not had secure property rights and individual liberty, so it's poor. So a large, not the majority even, less than the majority, but a large part of its population still gets energy the way our ancestors did, which means women, and I don't know, men are lazy, I'm not going to defend them, but women walk miles to find clean water and find fuel. wood, sticks, dung, whatever they can collect, hours a day. This is the case in Africa and South Asia for a lot of folks, over 1 billion people. They burn it inside in their houses. A little less than 4 million people die every year from indoor particulate pollution because they get energy the way our ancestors did, burning trees, grass, sticks, and dung inside houses. It is game-changing for these people to get energy. And what does it mean for the environment? When you look at that picture of the island of Hispaniola during the day, you will see Haiti is almost completely deforested. Because without oil and gas, you can't have forests, you can't have wilderness, you can't have open spaces or significant populations. England was completely deforested. It is lush, green, wet. You could scar the earth and in a week it would be green again. It's so lush. But they cut down all of their forests for energy and for the start of the Industrial Revolution. We were lucky. We had oil and gas by the time we had significant population centers in this country. So to me, oil and gas is about making people have meaningful lives. To me, it is significant what it means for people that work in our industry, but vastly more significant is what does it mean for everyone else in that country? If you don't have access to electricity or oil and gas, you don't have a life like we have. If you have access to expensive oil and gas, it's also totally different. My wife and I fly tomorrow to England. I'm going to go to Liverpool, a place I went and spoke at years ago about what shale gas means to this country. Right? The United States versus the rest of the developed world, $2,000 a year per family, cheaper energy prices in the US because we produce it in our country. Natural gas is expensive to transport. Where the Industrial Revolution began, in the Midlands of England, Liverpool's the port city. In Liverpool, there's 1 out of 3 households. There's not a single employed person living in those households. Why? Because they don't produce natural gas in England, onshore in England, right? You can't have industry. All their petrochemical plants have been shut and have moved to the US Gulf Coast. Blue-collar jobs are energy-intensive jobs. England as a whole is doing great. London, wealthy people in England are kicking butt. It's doing well. Blue-collar people depend massively on the price of energy. And the quality of living for a blue-collar person in the Midlands of England is unrecognizable compared to in our country. And the big difference is massive energy production right here. They used to have it in the Midlands of England. They don't have it anymore, and they're suffering for it.
They can engage to ask questions, meaningful questions around health and safety concerns they may have.
Well, our citizens have no problem emailing us directly. Or calling directly, or stopping me at Home Depot directly. Any email that's listed just to me, I answer. If they answer to the entire council, I'm not a big reply all guy. But I do respond to everybody that sends it directly to me. You know, in Broomfield, it's kind of interesting. We've got a pad, the Livingston pad, that a lot of people know in Broomfield. It's kind of at the juxtaposition of a couple neighborhoods, Anthem and Wildgrass. And it's a pad that I personally have never wanted to see there. And I've told this to Extraction, Matt and Eric Jacobson and stuff like that, because we have our future reservoir that's going to go there. So I've always had a concern about that. So I talked with our oil operator, and they're actually fine relocating the pad. The challenge is the county immediately adjacent to me, to the west, is fighting everything tooth and nail to get that moved. So we actually have an opportunity. We could move the pad. The operator's fine, taking on the extra expense and putting it in an area. We'd be over 2,000 foot from the nearest home. So it's actually kind of an optimum site. So that's always one of the things that, as our community, we need to get together and, to me, work at trying to see what we can do to relocate that pad to another site. I haven't given up. I won't give up till the day that...
Clearly you haven't.
No, but the operator's fine with it. You would think, if you think about it, you have a pad, you want to move the location, most people would think it would be the operator that would be the biggest obstacle. In this case, it's a county that's a bigger obstacle. in Boulder County. So we're working on that and keep pushing it. It'll be interesting after their election. We'll see how it changes, but then we only have a couple months, to try to get it done. But I encourage our citizens to get engaged, to talk about it, to see what we can do about trying to relocate that particular site, because we've done a pretty good job. With everything else, it's the one piece of the puzzle. We actually negotiated and got that pad site cut in half for what it originally, there's now 19 wells, it was scheduled for 38. But I personally just have a big problem with our future reservoir being there, so I'm always gonna push to try to keep that away.
We hear you. Thank you. Julie, any input?
Sure. At COGCC, we are a staff of a number of different technical disciplines, but we really rely and work closely with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment on public health related questions related to oil and gas. And I think Dr. Walk, who's now transitioned, and his agency have done a great job of trying to build a program around oil and gas health impacts and oil and gas health impact questions. And they have a mobile unit that can be sent out to sample air in a community if somebody is concerned. And to me, that I hope is the first place Colorado citizens are looking to engage and to understand public health safety questions. And I think that was the genesis of your comment, right?
Yes, it was.
So,
Heidi, if you could lean into this question, what, in your opinion, is the best response to renewables only and the position moving forward with that?
Big question. I'd probably kick it to Chris, just because, to Chris's point, he has done every type of energy before, but I think before he went into Liberty. But I would say that there's the misinformation. I mean, you can't have renewables without natural gas, and we have to have those conversations and have, again, people be educated on what that looks like.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I love all energy technologies that work. We have significant data on this. Look, if you want to look at an attempt to go to 100% renewables, which I think is human history was all 100% renewables, and we had mid-30s life expectancy. So it doesn't necessarily mean everybody thinks renewables is clean and better and the others aren't. The data actually doesn't support that. And of course, even the name renewables is a misleader. Wind turbines last 20 years. Oil wells last over 30 years. A wind turbine has 100 tons of coal in the steel tower. Steel is made out of iron and coal. 100 tons of coal in every tower of a big wind turbine. The blades are made out of oil and gas. They're manufactured, transported, serviced with vehicles running oil and gas. So it's impossible to have wind power without oil, gas, and coal. So they're not replacements, they maybe go together. Germany went all in to try to get, and we say 100% renewables, that's electricity. Electricity is 40% of US or Colorado energy consumption. So that wouldn't be 100% energy renewables, it'd be our electricity grid. Germany has attempted this. German electricity prices are 3 times what the United States are, 3 times. How much manufacturing and new jobs are created in Germany in energy intensive industries? You can guess. So for rich people, getting paid subsidies to build stuff that make electricity price expensive is great. For working class people, it's a significant problem. The other comment about Germany, Germany's reduced their CO2 emissions less than the United States in the last decade. In the United States, we've driven down our CO2 emissions on a per capita basis lower than any year since before I was born. The driver of that, a little bit wind, a little bit solar, a little bit larger piece energy efficiency stuff. 2/3 of the driver of that, the shale revolution and cheap natural gas in the United States, getting electricity from it. In Germany, they're building 8 new coal plants under construction now, right? They don't have local domestic natural gas production. They tried to do it with wind and solar alone. Of course, simple math says 0 chance of working, but people do things. If politically popular, they'll try to do it. So we should just look at the others. United Kingdom has done the same thing. They will never get there. And of course, energy poverty is a massive term in the wealthy countries of Great Britain and Germany. Energy poverty is a massive term because when you triple electricity prices, rich people, particularly people making money off this new industries, are happy with it, but it isn't good for everyone. So when we get great technologies that can grow electricity from different sources, I'm all in. But using subsidies to enrich wealthy people and make energy more expensive for everybody else, I get offered these deals all the time to invest in them. I don't invest in them. I never invest in anything where it requires forcibly extracting money from other people, either through taxes or rate increases on their electricity, and putting them in my pocket. Our company's called Liberty for a reason. Energy technology enhancements and environmental improvements come from humans voting with their wallet books every day. They don't come from top-down mandates, because they just don't work.
And how do you really feel? No, I'm just kidding.
I did want to add one
Yes.
point to just the impact. So what's interesting is actually we were contacted recently from a solar farm in Wells County, and the neighbors are upset about the solar farm. So, I think that it needs to be a part of the discussion that there are still impacts, whether it is a solar farm, whether it is wind turbines. I know my dad's an electrical engineer, and 20 years ago they were putting these up in California, and then now there's a lot of environmental issues with the birds. And so I think that we just have to also recognize that even if you do have a renewable operation there in terms of what we do, there are still legitimate impacts that people just also don't want in close proximity to their homes. So it's the same challenges: noise, light. A lot for them is the aesthetics, because those are there forever. And to Chris's point, when a well is for 30 years and you come back and you reclaim it, that's a lot less of an impact over time.
We have time for a couple more questions, Julie. This one is aimed at the regulatory side. Specifically, we are worried that COGCC is understaffed and not able to adequately oversee and regulate the booming oil and gas industry. It seems you process permit after their permit is or drilling is started, and there's pressure to extract as much resource as possible. What would you say to that?
I think starting on the last piece of that, efficiency of development is important to our agency, and so I might be misinterpreting the question a bit, but we do want the most efficient development technology possible because that decreases the service impacts. In terms of understaffed, I think that our current or our outgoing legislators and governor have established what they think is the appropriate oversight for the state and its growing oil and gas industry. Our agency has doubled in 5 or 10 years in terms of its number of staffing, and has, in Matt Lepore's tenure, 5 years, he's the former director, grew by 50% again. So I think there has been a huge focus from our legislators who are in charge of setting the number of staffing that our agency employs, to making sure that we do have adequate oversight. And yes, we are currently getting flooded with permits right now, but our goal is to process them in accordance with the law, not in accordance with the volume that are coming in the door. That's our mission, that's our goal. And so we're continuing to meet our expectations, our metrics for inspections of high priority locations every year. The number of locations is set in April, and each of those are visited, and that's been a consistent metric we have accomplished year over year, regardless of the number of wells. I think the other interesting thing to think through is that because of horizontal development, we need fewer vertical pieces or surface impacts per amount of energy developed or amount of oil and gas taken out of the ground. And so there's going to be an interesting point at which our well numbers continue to drop, and I think we're already there, but the amount of oil and gas extracted rises. And again, that's a function of increasing well efficiency, and that's an important metric to keep in mind, I think, as we're looking through this. But we are continuing to have dialogue about what the appropriate staffing number is, and I'm sure the incoming administration will have its own opinions.
Chris, I just want to add one thing on efficiency Julie talked about. Natural gas. 15 years ago, the US was building import terminals for natural gas because we couldn't import enough for Canada to make up for the shortfall we were producing here. So natural gas prices were very high. Our arcane million British thermal units, natural gas averaged about $8 in 2007 and 2008. And we had 1,600 rigs drilling for natural gas in this country. So what's the story today? We have 180 rigs drilling for natural gas. Only a little more than 10% as many rigs drilling for natural gas. Our natural gas production is 40% higher and growing. That's the efficiency story of the shale revolution. Massively less drilling rigs than we had before, massively higher natural gas production, and natural gas prices are 1/3 of what they were 10 years ago.
Chris, when you have the mic, this is an interesting question and one that we've talked about the effects on injecting wells in the future, let's say 10 to 30, 50 years down the road, specifically tremors, earthquakes, etc.
Yes. So when we produce oil and natural gas, there's water. All the rocks, once you get below the soil, all the rocks underground are saturated with water. All of them. There's a few that also have oil and gas in them. So when we produce oil and gas in Colorado, we produce natural gas liquids, oil, and water. This water comes from 1.5 miles or 2 miles underground. It's salty, it's nasty. It's been underground for 100 million years. The best thing to do with that water, our industry made a tragic mistake because the municipal government in Pennsylvania said, let us process the water. You know, for them it was a revenue stream. Let us process the water. Probably a little political pressure, and one of the producers in our company, in our industry, agreed and gave them produced water from the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania to process. Well, they couldn't treat everything that's in natural water. This municipal processing thing released that water into a stream, and we damaged the environment in Pennsylvania, and we've been crucified for it ever since, and we shouldn't do that. The best thing to do with produced water is to inject it deep underground. But if you inject it deep underground without doing it carefully, you absolutely can and will cause earthquakes. Our industry has caused a lot of earthquakes. This really angers me. I've been very outspoken about this for 5 or 10 years. And the poster child for doing it wrong is Oklahoma. And Oklahoma's taken a ton of produced water, injected it into this formation called the Arbuckle. Quick geology, there's sedimentary rocks, meaning the streams flowing out of the mountains carrying sediment. That's how rocks are formed. Those are the top few miles of the earth, and then below that is what we call basement rock. Think of El Capitan in Yosemite, granite, basement rock. To get big earthquakes, you need basement rock, because you can get big faults in it. They're injecting all this produced water into the bottom sedimentary layer, and it's all seeping into big faults in basement rock. And they have created this enormous rash of earthquakes in Oklahoma. The one thing I lose sleep about the shale revolution every night is an earthquake is going to kill someone, and it's our fault. They're finally owned up to the problem in Oklahoma. They're reducing the injection into the Arbuckle. They're starting to fix it, but it will take a few years to fade away. In Colorado, I think we've been much wiser. There are faults in Colorado in sedimentary rock. You can create earthquakes, not big earthquakes, but you can create earthquakes that we shouldn't be creating. And most of the injection wells now have monitoring for seismicity. It takes about a magnitude 3 to feel it at the surface, a magnitude 4, and the ground will shake. Before you get a magnitude 3 or 4 earthquake, you'll get magnitude 0, you'll get magnitude 1, you'll get magnitude 2 earthquakes, which we can measure with sensors. All you have to do is monitor what's going on, and if they start to get within a factor of 100 energy-wise of shaking the surface, change your injection procedures, do a new injection well, inject in a different zone. Proactively, you can map where the faults are, and don't inject near big faults, and monitor. So it's an incredibly solvable problem, but our industry has not done a good job over the last decade with it. I believe we will, I believe this gal will, and solve this problem. I do not believe it will be a problem in Colorado, but only because we will proactively stop it. Julie?
I would love to just offer a couple of comments. I think Colorado does have a very different regulatory regime than Oklahoma, and has had that different regulatory regime in place for quite a while. And because of that, we haven't seen these types of impacts. And what our agency does, we permit underground injection control wells is what they're called. It's a delegated program from the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. And we have those monitoring pieces in place. We have what we call a stoplight system. So green means continue to inject at the rate at which you are authorized, you the operator. If we begin to see low-level indications of seismicity, we require the operator to back off the injection pressure or volume or both. If that resolves the issue, we can go back to green and continue. If it doesn't resolve the problem, that's when we go into a cease injection procedure. So we are monitoring it in that fashion to make sure that we don't create those kinds of problems because they don't benefit anybody. So.
Thank you. Last question, and we'll give you final words. Any of you can address this if you'd like. As the increase of drilling continues, what's being done to use less fresh water? Per well, this person says over 16,000 barrels per well, fracking 120,000 barrels. Anyone?
Yeah, so there's trade-offs in everything, as we've talked about in this panel. You can frack with less water for sure. I'm not sure it's the right trade-off. In Colorado, less than 0.2% of the freshwater consumption in Colorado is used for oil and gas production. Depending on how you measure us, we're 4 to 10% of the economy. So in a water efficiency metric, the oil and gas industry is 20 to 40 times more efficient than Colorado as a whole in using water. We can frack with brackish water, so you can drill deeper wells and use water that wouldn't be fresh. It's more expensive. If we ever got near, like we were really stressing water and we were a source of a problem, it's a very fixable problem by using more expensive to access but lower quality brackish water that would never be used for fresh water. But I think it's an issue that sounds like it's serious. I don't think the data across the country, or actually in any location in the country, shows it as that. And I'll show one other thing. When you see a power plant, a natural gas burning power plant or a coal plant, and you see that big white plume going up, 30 or 40 years ago when I was a kid, they were brown plumes. Now they're white plumes. What you're seeing is water vapor, right? When you burn methane gas, there's only two things that are byproducts of that. We combine methane plus oxygen, and we produce CO2, the greenhouse gas, plant food, and water. All that is water, is fresh water. The typical oil and gas well uses, in raw numbers, a fair amount of fresh water to produce that well, but it produces about 2 to 4 times more fresh water than it consumes. You see it coming out of those power plants. When you cook in your stove and you see condensation and you see water in there, that is water from burning natural gas. So we're actually a significant net producer of fresh water. But again, if it was truly stressing the water supplies, you could use brackish water. But I think our net effect on water is very small, and actually a small net positive.
I think I might offer one other comment, and the question of reuse of produced water, to me, at our agency comes up most often on the West Slope in the Piceance Basin, where it's fairly dry and road access is different from the Front Range in that you have more isolated locations. And operators there and our agency and our staff there are really focused on looking at how we can be more efficient with produced water. It improves, there are a number of ancillary efficiency improvements that come with reusing that water. And so I think this continues to be a hot topic. There are a number of states that are digging into this issue, EPA is digging into this issue. And so I think there's more to come on it, more because it is an important resource and there could also be really beneficial efficiencies gained from it. So.
Great, thank you. We're going to give each of our panelists just a couple of minutes to wrap up with any final thoughts that you might have. Heidi, I'm going to start with you, and just any final words to the audience about your industry and more importantly, how they can get engaged.
I would just say, with Urban being here and sitting on this panel and being very active, I left to start Urban 16 months ago, in the support that we have from operators, regulatory bodies, communities, local governments is huge. And so I think that message needs to get out that industry is absolutely trying. I'm a perfect example of industry's willingness to invest in the future. And I think that's a story that sometimes doesn't get told enough. The other thing is Proposition 112. I was at my eye doctor yesterday and I'm exhausted and it's been a long day and I'm like, do I go into it? I'm so tired. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to. And I ended up having a great conversation with the whole office. It's probably because I'm so shy. And they had no idea. And then they start talking like, well, my uncle works in North Dakota and supports this many people through oil and gas. And so if you you need to vote however you feel you need to vote, but if you are passionate about it and you think that 2,500 is too far, if half a mile is too far, tell people, talk to them, even if it's hard, even if it's difficult, we have to do it, because if we don't do it, our industry is in massive jeopardy, and same thing with our state.
I'm going to go a little bit off script and not talk about the regulatory environment, and touch on the topic of where do we get good information. That means I will make a quick plug for our website. Again, we have a ton of information about oil and gas development in Colorado, what we're doing, what's available, and what's happening in communities. We've created a dashboard that allows people to look by county and by some cities for what abandoned locations are in the vicinity of your county, what active oil and gas operations are going on, what reclamation, what spills, in an effort to help provide information to people who want to find out more about this issue and how the state is dealing with it. But the piece that I really wanted to say, in reflecting on a number of the comments from the panelists, is to talk to each other. I mean, where is the best source of information? Your neighbors are on both sides of this issue, I promise you. And so in talking to them and understanding their perspective, I think you don't have to reach the same conclusions, but at least understand their facts. I think there's plenty of good information that you can get from other people and reach a different conclusion. And that to me is the foundational piece of it. You don't have to go to just the sources that you trust on one side or the other or whatever else. You can go and review those and reach your own thoughts. So I would encourage you, there is tons of information, whether it's watching Chris's videos or reading his articles, whether it's looking at Environmental Defense Fund. All of those are valid sources. Take a look and think through it. So.
Julie, thank you. Chris? Yeah, I fumbled the ball in not pointing out the COGC website for information. It is fantastic. I use it all the time. I dropped the ball on that. The political issue is huge. Heidi hit that well and better than I can. I'll just end with the general comments on energy. Energy matters. It matters to human lives. You know, we're often sold that it'll be cheaper and cleaner. You know, shouldn't we vote for that? Well, hell yeah, but it won't be. We don't have a way to make it cheaper and cleaner with waving a magic wand. I spent years on that. There are technologies there, but the net result has been more land use, more expensive, less reliable. And the impact on people's lives, the places that have done that, are very meaningful. One other example, sort of like, I talked about Germany and the United Kingdom. Look at California. I lived in California for 19 years. I went to graduate school in California. California's an incredibly wealthy, dynamic, beautiful, spectacular state. Highest poverty rate in the nation. Why? Renewable portfolio standards have made electricity massively expensive, which means industry, blue-collar jobs have fled the state. Restrictions on development of not just oil and gas, but housing and all that. You restrict supply, you get higher prices. When you restrict individual liberty and free enterprise, it does not lead to good results, and the biggest victims by far and away are low-income people. To me, politics is all about what will best help the people that aren't as lucky as me. That's what political decisions, that's what economic impactful decisions, I think the lens you should look at through them. And the price of energy is a major component of the price of food and the price of housing, right? The three necessities for life: housing, food, energy. And housing and food depend massively on energy for their cost. So it's not a thing to be disinterested in. It's worth looking a little bit more into energy, wherever it comes from in all forms. I'm not making a plug for oil and gas. I'm just saying your energy matters a lot.
Chris, thank you. Mayor Ahrens, final word.
Yeah, I guess the final thing I would like to say is I think some of the big arguments and challenges with oil and gas on the 2,500-foot setback all come down to perceptions on safety. And I think, it's the health and safety that we need to be, diligent on. And we've got some rulemaking things that are coming up with the COGCC. And I thank Julie for her leadership in doing that. And Broomfield's been very involved with some of those rulemakings. And a lot of that comes from our task force. And we're trying to do the best things that we can. We are working together with our neighbor communities and trying to come up with the best results. And I think we need to really be vigilant on that. We need to look at things that we can pass that are reasonable through the legislature to maintain a safe and healthy environment. I think most people understand you need oil and gas. They drive their car to work every day. And I think most people would agree with that. And I think everybody would agree you need to do it in, the safest way possible. And so I feel pretty fortunate that our community is kind of coalesced and come behind that. And that's what we're working on. We're working on what's going to be the safest and the healthiest environment. I want to point out something, I just think it's kind of odd. I got appointed to be on the Regional Air Quality Control Commission years ago by Bill Owens. And we were concerned, we just had like the 7-county metro area, and we had to keep our VOCs down to certain levels, guidelines by the EPA to make sure we got national transportation funds. And it was pretty interesting as the car manufacturers got better and better at making the engines and stuff like that. That was the biggest reason that the VOCs dropped. But then we were looking at adding Weld County and Larimer County into that mix. And everybody got scared because we knew immediately if we added Weld County, the VOCs were going to come up because of all the cattle. That was a bigger concern than the oil and gas, was the VOCs from the cattle. So I think, you got to pay attention to the, the statistics that are out there and the facts and read through them. I think it's all interesting, and I appreciate the other panelists being up here today. And for you all taking the time, I hope you learned something. And if you have other questions, call Chris.
Let's hear it for all of our panelists for your efforts.